Thank you, Director Wray. I'll begin by recognizing myself for questions. Mr. Director, I'm sure you're aware of the recent media reports indicating that Peter Strzok, who is a special agent at the FBI, changed the words grossly negligent to extremely careless in former Director Comey's statement closing the Clinton investigation. Are you aware of that?
I've heard some of the same information you have.
Great. Do you know by chance what the criminal intent standard is under the Espionage Act, in particular 18 U.S.C. 793F?
I haven't studied the statute recently, but I believe it's gross negligence.
That's right. It is gross negligence. So would it be accurate to say that a senior FBI official changed the wording of the director's statement to ensure that Secretary Clinton was not liable under the Espionage Act?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you may know, the handling of the investigation into Secretary Clinton is currently the subject of an outside independent investigation by the Inspector General, and I think it would not be appropriate for me to speculate about what the Inspector General will or will not find.
That is probably appropriate, but it's still not at all inappropriate to ask you to draw a legal conclusion about a standard in the law that was changed in a statement that your predecessor put out as a justification for closing the investigation of the former Secretary of State.
Well, as I said, Mr. Chairman, I believe the standard is gross negligence. I leave it to others to conclude whether extremely careless and gross negligence are the same thing. But I will say that the particulars of the investigation and the decisions that were made and whether or not it was handled appropriately is, as I think it should be, the subject of an outside independent investigation by the Inspector General. And I look forward to his findings, as I'm sure the committee does as well.
In July of 2016, the State Department revealed that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton exchanged on her unsecured private server nearly 24 top-secret emails with 3 State Department officials. The classification top secret means, in part, the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. Can you explain to the American people how the FBI could not be investigating actions taken by individuals like those named in 2016, Jacob Sullivan, Cheryl Mills, William Burns, that threatened grave damage to the national security?
Well, as I said, Mr. Chairman, the handling of the investigation and whether or not, in particular, whether or not decisions made in that investigation were the product of any improper considerations is precisely what the outside independent Inspector General is investigating. And when we get his findings, I will look and see what appropriate action we can take at the FBI in response to that.
Can anyone on this committee set up a private server now and conduct classified business on it, since not a single person has been prosecuted or held accountable for the Clinton email investigation?
No.
Thank you. Director Wray, what are you doing to ensure that the top ranks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation are cleared of individuals who are tainted by bias or those who have exhibited indiscretion by failing to demonstrate the integrity Americans expect from their top law enforcement officials?
Well, the first thing I'm doing is respecting the outside independent investigations that are underway. My preference is to be one of these people who is not a act first and ask questions later kind of guy, but an ask questions first and then act kind of guy. And so I think these matters are being looked at, as they should be, by somebody outside the FBI. And when those findings come to me, I will take appropriate action if necessary. In the meantime, I am emphasizing in every audience I can inside the Bureau that our decisions need to be made based on nothing other than the facts and the law and our rules and our processes and our core values, and not based on any political considerations by any side of the aisle.
Thank you. Does the FBI obtain a warrant before accessing and reading Americans' email?
It depends on the situation, but yes.
So can you explain why you obtain a criminal search warrant before reading an email of someone under investigation for a crime?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Can you explain why you obtain a criminal search warrant before reading an email of someone under investigation for a crime?
Well, in the situations where a search warrant is required, and of course under the Fourth Amendment, there are plenty of situations where a search warrant is not required. There are all sorts of aspects to the Fourth Amendment. But in those situations where we seek a warrant, it's because the Fourth Amendment requires it.
Section 702, as you and I both noted, is up for renewal within a few weeks. It is a critical national security tool that must be reauthorized. You and I agree on that as well. But it is just that, a national security tool, not a criminal tool. Is it reasonable when accessing content that shows evidence of a routine crime and is located in the FBI 702 database that agents should obtain some process as is required in criminal cases?
Mr. Chairman, I've appreciated our discussions on Section 702. My own view is that Section 702, as currently drafted, which is the view shared by the question, is fully constitutional and lawful. And I would say to you that our handling of querying of the information in the 702 database is querying of information that is already lawfully and constitutionally in the FBI's possession and is most useful at the earliest stages when information is coming in fragments and the Bureau is trying to make assessments of what do we have, is this a real threat, where is this going? And I would implore the committee and the Congress not to begin rebuilding the wall that existed before 9/11.
Well, thank you. My time's expired, but I will add that we share that concern as well, and that's why we have drawn a clear distinction between national security and solving domestic crimes. And when it comes to the query, we allow that to move forward. But when you then find that there's something related to the investigation of a domestic crime, then you should go ahead and get a search warrant. And we've protected the FBI's ability to access that database for the purpose of a query. But then if you're going to take it further and actually read the contents of the emails, if they're national security, go right ahead, because you may be stopping a terrorist attack. But if you're solving a domestic crime, whatever it might be, then I think you need to respect the civil liberties of American citizens and get a warrant. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his questions.
Thank you. Let me say prior to my statement that I totally agree with the chairman in his observations on 702 and on the distinctions we made in our bill between national security and counterintelligence operations on the one hand and investigations of domestic crimes on the other, where you should get a warrant, where you normally need a warrant. Director Wray, I'd like to ask you for your help putting the events of the last few days into context. To set the stage, over the summer, in an interview with the New York Times, President Trump stated, quote, "When Nixon came along, out of courtesy, the FBI started reporting to the Department of Justice. But the FBI person really reports directly to the President of the United States," close quote. Director Wray, you have one direct report to the executive branch. To whom do you directly report?
I directly report to the Deputy Attorney General, who then reports to the Attorney General.
Thank you. Has President Trump ever asked you to sidestep the chain of command and report directly to him?
No.
Also, over the summer, former Director Comey testified that during a private dinner, President Trump told him, quote, "I need loyalty. I expect loyalty." Has President Trump ever asked you for loyalty?
I have never been asked by the President to take any kind of loyalty oath. My loyalty is to the Constitution, to the laws of this country, and to the good men and people of America.
Thank you. Last week, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to one felony count of lying to the FBI about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador. I would like to put President Trump's initial Twitter reaction up on the screen. I won't read it, but I will simply say he claims here to have known that General Flynn committed a crime at the time General Flynn was fired. There's some controversy as to whether the president actually wrote this tweet. The White House later claimed that it came from the president's private attorney. But I'm not sure that it matters who wrote it, given the Department of Justice's litigating position that these tweets are, quote, official statements of the President of the United States, close quote. A few clarifying questions, Mr. Director. In your experience at the Department of Justice, have you ever prosecuted a case involving a charge of obstruction of justice?
Yes.
And sections 1503, 1505, and 1512 of Title 18 make it a crime if someone corruptly, quote, obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding, close quote. What does it mean to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede an official proceeding?
Congressman, that would require me to get into kind of a legal discussion. It's been a while since I've looked at the case law on the subject. I do know, have somebody who's been both a line prosecutor and a senior Justice Department official and a defense attorney, that sometimes the language of that statute can be trickier than folks at first appreciate.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I'm glad you're respecting the fact that I only have 5 minutes. Does obstruction of justice require specific intent? In other words, does a prosecutor have to establish that the defendant had knowledge of the official proceeding and intended to obstruct it?
Sitting here right now, Congressman, I don't remember the specifics of exactly what the intent requirement is.
Okay, so you can't say if it matters that a suspect... Well, does it matter that a suspect has knowledge of a crime when he attempts to wave off criminal investigators? In other words, if he has knowledge of a crime and he attempts to wave off criminal investigators, does that constitute obstruction of justice?
Well, certainly the defendant's knowledge and state of mind and intent is a critical element of the offense.
Okay. Later that day, the president tweeted this claim that we'll put up there, and in effect, he accuses former Director Comey of giving false testimony. Mr. Comey testified that President Trump urged him to be lenient with Michael Flynn, producing a note in which he quoted the president saying, I hope you can let this go. In multiple appearances before Congress, Attorney General Sessions appears to have corroborated both the fact of the meeting and the gist of the conversation between the president and Director Comey. Director Wray, do you have any reason to doubt the testimony of Director Comey or Attorney General Sessions on this point?
Congressman, the questions you're asking go directly to what Special Counsel Mueller is investigating. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to be weighing in on that in this setting.
You don't think you can say whether you have reason to doubt the veracity of a statement because that might be under investigation?
Congressman, the question you're asking me, and I appreciate the reasons for the question, but the questions you're asking me would be asking me to weigh in on witnesses in the course of an investigation that's ongoing, and I don't think that's appropriate for me to do.
Fair enough. At your confirmation hearing, you testified that you would, quote, consider any effort to tamper with Director Mueller's investigation unacceptable and inappropriate. That any such effort would need to be dealt with very sternly and appropriately indeed. Since your confirmation, has the President ever contacted you about the Special Counsel's investigation? Has the Attorney General or anybody else at the White House?
No.
Okay, my final question is, the President's tirade ended with one final tweet where he says your reputation is in tatters. After years of, Director Wray, and it's up there. We have heard other veterans of the FBI and the Department of Justice push back against this attack on the reputation of the FBI. With the time I have, but we haven't heard from you. With the time I have left, will you respond to this tweet by the President? Is the FBI's reputation in tatters?
Mr. Chairman, may I have time to answer this question because it's something that matters to me a great deal.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Congressman, there is no shortage of opinions out there. What I can tell you is that the FBI that I see is tens of thousands of agents and analysts and staff working their tails off to keep Americans safe from the next terrorist attack, gang violence, child predators, spies from Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. The FBI that I see is tens of thousands of brave men and women who are working as hard as they can to keep people that they will never know safe from harm. And the FBI that I see is reflected in folks like the new class of agents that I swore in at Quantico 2 days ago, hard-charging, high-integrity people like the hostage rescue team and SWAT teams that we send out into all sorts of danger with almost no notice. The FBI that I see is people, decent people, committed to the highest principles of integrity and professionalism and respect. The FBI that I see is respected and appreciated by our partners in federal, state, and local law enforcement, in the intelligence community, by our foreign counterparts, both law enforcement and national security, in something like 200 countries around the globe. That's the FBI that I see. Now, do we make mistakes? You bet we make mistakes, just like everybody who's human makes mistakes. And when we make mistakes, there are independent processes like that of the outside independent inspector general that will drive and dive deep into the facts surrounding those mistakes. And when that independent fact-finding is complete, we will hold our folks accountable if that's appropriate.
It's very fine. Thank you very much. I yield back.